Here's a hard truth. The way you're using ChatGPT is probably costing you job offers. Why? Because generic prompts like write me a cover letter or update my resume only give you generic results. Everyone else is using those exact same prompts, and that is why you're still seeing rejection after rejection. But that all changes today. I'm gonna show you a simple 4-step ChatGPT prompt formula that flips the script and gives you personalized, offer-winning outputs every single time. You can use it for pretty much anything in your job search: resumes, cover letters, LinkedIn, networking, anything you can think of. And when you do, you're gonna drastically increase your chances of landing more offers while saving time in the process. Let's dive in. To start, I wanna give you a comparison between the generic ChatGPT prompts that most people are using and the detail-oriented, context-rich prompts that I want you to begin using after you watch this video. Let's say I have some friends coming to visit me and I wanna take them out for Italian in New York City, specifically in Hell's Kitchen. I can go to ChatGPT and say, hey, find me restaurants in Hell's Kitchen with great Italian food. And it can give me some basic results. But I have no idea if these restaurants are gonna be my taste, are gonna be in my price point, are gonna be good for my group and their specific needs. I'll have to guess, I'll have to call the restaurants, I'll have to comb through reviews and do all that extra work. But what if I just gave ChatGPT a little bit more context? I could start with the same overarching prompt, help me find Italian in Hell's Kitchen, but then I can give it some of the details that are important to me, such as, I'd prefer to sit outside because it's beautiful in New York. We have 2 people with allergies, one gluten and one nut allergy, and we're all coming from different parts of the city, so we wanna make sure that we're close to a subway. Well, now ChatGPT is gonna give me a very different output. Instead of several generic Italian options, it gave me 2 specific options that meet most of my criteria. It called out potential issues and questions to check, and it gave me proximity to the subway. So hopefully this is a good illustration to show you why spending a little bit more time providing that context and that detail is gonna get you better, more unique, and more effective outputs. So what I wanna do now is give you a repeatable ChatGPT prompt formula that you can use for anything in your job search, from updating your resume to preparing for interviews to coming up with networking messages and more. When you leverage this, you are gonna get better, more personalized outputs every single time, so you spend less time prompting ChatGPT and more time making progress in your job search. All right, here is the perfect job search ChatGPT prompt formula: CRAE. I wanna walk you through what each of these letters means, as well as how they work together to get you an awesome, highly personalized and effective output almost every single time. So the C in our formula stands for context. Context is an overview of the scenario, including relevant information and data that ChatGPT can use to understand exactly what you need help with, as well as to be able to assess all the different tools and paths and solutions it can use to offer that help. This is arguably the most important part of the prompt. It's also one of the most overlooked things. Most people don't include this at all. So the pro tip here is to just provide as much detail as you possibly can. Attaching files, adding spreadsheets, adding screenshots, talking it through your thought process so far and what you're struggling with, what you've tried that's worked and what hasn't. The more info that you give up top, the more ChatGPT is going to be able to dial into the specific pain points and needs that you have, and that is going to lead to a better output. So let's look at some examples here. A bad example is what most people would say. They'd show up to ChatGPT and just say, please rewrite my resume bullets. And again, that's gonna get you a generic output. Instead, what we wanna do is tell ChatGPT exactly what we need here. So for example, I'm revising my resume with the goal of applying to account executive roles at Fortune 500 tech companies. I'm attaching the job description of a role that aligns with the types of roles I'm targeting. I'm also attaching a copy of my resume, and I want you to help me revise my bullets to be optimized for these types of roles. So now we're telling ChatGPT the types of roles we're targeting, the types of companies we're targeting, we're giving it our resume so it has our entire history, and we're also giving it a job description so it can see the type of role that we're looking for. Finally, we're telling it what we want it to help us with, which is optimizing those bullets. There is a ton of context baked into this paragraph here. This is a really strong starting point. The R in our formula stands for role. Most people don't think about defining a role for ChatGPT, and the problem with that is when no role is defined, ChatGPT is going to pull its information from anywhere and everywhere. It's not going to really think about where it's sourcing it from. However, if we define a role, we narrow the scope of where that information should come from. And if we set the role correctly, that is going to lead to that information coming from places that are more aligned with the expertise you need, and that's going to get you a better output. So the pro tip here is to build your unicorn. In the real world, it's unlikely that somebody would have a PhD PhD in marketing and 20 plus years of experience as a recruiter at some company over here. But that is not unrealistic for ChatGPT because it has access to all that information. So think about years of experience, think about degrees, think about certifications, think about industries, think about projects, and use all of those to essentially craft the perfect assistant or the perfect partner for this task and write that out for ChatGPT. So example-wise, most people skip the role entirely. They just don't even think about adding this. But you're not going to do that because you watched this video. Instead, you are going to add a role that looks something like this. Since we are talking about optimizing resume bullets, we might say, assume the role of a data-driven resume writer with 20 plus years of experience as a hiring manager and recruiter for Fortune 500 technology companies like Salesforce, Amazon, and Microsoft. This role perfectly aligns to the goals that we stated in the context, as well as the task that we stated in the context as well, which we're going to talk about next. And that brings us to A in our formula, which stands for actions. The actions are essentially the specific step-by-step instructions that we want ChatGPT to take to complete our task. Now, the beautiful part about these actions is that we get to define how this process unfolds. Rather than just letting ChatGPT assume the best route, we can actually tell it the specific steps and the path that we want it to take, which means that we can include things that are tailored to the way we want it to approach this task. We can also include specific best practices. We can even bake in examples as we go. But maybe you're not sure about the best way to handle this. So if that's the case, my pro tip for you is to go into a different chat and basically ask ChatGPT for the step-by-step instructions it would recommend for completing this task in order to achieve a certain outcome. So in our example, we might say, hey, please give me detailed steps for crafting a job-winning resume bullet. It's going to go ahead and output those steps. You can copy those and then paste them into the prompt that you're building here. So really easy way to do this if you're unsure about what those best practices or those steps should be. Example-wise, again, most people are just going to say, rewrite this resume bullet. Maybe they add a few other lines of context. We want to go deeper. We want to have a specific series of steps that talks through all the actions ChatGPT should take. For example, start by scanning the job description to identify relevant keywords and qualifications. Then review my resume to get an understanding of my experience and qualifications. Finally, revise each bullet on my resume so it includes those keywords, it includes measurable outcomes, and it's aligned to the role that I'm targeting. And finally, share those revised bullets along with a summary so I can see the changes that you made. This is a really detailed stepwise process that makes sure that the process ChatGPT goes through is aligned with the way we want it to optimize our bullets. Finally, the E in our formula stands for examples. And this is where you're going to share an example of what a good output should look like for this task. The reason this is important is because we are going to want the output to look a certain way. We are expecting ChatGPT to spit out something that is in a certain format, that has a certain structure. And the best way to ensure ChatGPT hits that consistently is to show it exactly what you want it to output. Now, the problem is you may not be sure of what a great output looks like, or you may just not want to put the effort in to build a great output. For example, if you're using this prompt to write a cover letter, you don't want to have to then go write an entire cover letter just to put it back into this prompt. So in order to get a great example that you can plug into your framework here, all you need to do is run the prompt with everything else ahead of this. So the C, the R, and the A. Run that prompt and tell it to give you 10 variations. Then review those variations and cherry pick your favorite aspects of each and use it to essentially create your perfect output. Then copy that and use it as your example of good to complete the entire prompt formula. So example-wise, we might say, as a bad example, here's a bullet from my resume. So going back to our bad examples, we might be saying, please revise this bullet on my resume. Here's an example of that bullet, and then we send that prompt. Instead, what we want to do here is say, here's an example of what a good output might look like. Here's the company on my resume, here's the role, so that I can easily pick out when you share this output, which bullets relate to which roles. And then here are specific bullet examples that match the criteria that I shared earlier. So we're basically saying, hey, ChatGPT, when you give me that final output, I want it to look like this, but I want you to inject the content that I'm sharing earlier on in this prompt. All right, so now you know what every letter in the formula stands for. Let me show you an example that combines all of them into one single prompt, and we're gonna stay with the theme of optimizing our resume bullets. So here, you can see we start with our context, which is focused on telling ChatGPT that we want to apply for these AE roles at Fortune 500 tech companies. We're sharing our job description and our resume, and we're telling it we want to optimize those bullets. Then we tell it to assume the role of that data-driven resume writer with 2 decades of experience in recruitment at the companies that we're targeting. Then for the actions, we walk it through our specific bullet optimization process. We tell it to look at the job description, look at our resume, optimize these bullets so they meet certain guidelines, and then make sure that it shares the summary so we know what changes it made. And then finally, we share an example of what we want the output to look like so that we know when ChatGPT sends us the information back, it's going to follow a certain format that we're familiar with. So now that this prompt is constructed, I can essentially use this anytime I want to optimize the bullets on my resume, and I can copy and paste and tweak it as I move forward in the job search and as I get more information and update and refine my process. So that wraps up the anatomy of a great prompt. When you're using any AI, whether it's ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, anything else for your job search, you want to structure your prompt like this. Start with context, define the role that ChatGPT should assume, walk ChatGPT through the step-by-step instructions it should take to complete your task, and finally, give an example of what a great output should look like. So now you know the anatomy of the perfect ChatGPT prompt for your job search. I hope you use this far and wide across many different use cases. But if you don't want to remember everything I said or pause the video and try to write everything down, you can grab the free copy and paste template right here at austinbelsack.com/prompt. It also comes with the entire example that I just shared a couple of seconds ago, so you can have that to leverage. But I can't wait to see how you're going to implement this in your search. If you have ideas, let me know in the comments. I always get new ideas from our audience. Those lead to new videos. Feel free to ask any questions as well. But outside of that, thank you for watching. Happy job hunting, and I will see you in the next video.